time. And we'll just spend a few minutes playing with Philippians chapter 2. And let's look at Philippians chapter 2, first of all, in terms of textual arrangement. How is it arranged? Let's just work our way from verse 1, let's say, through 11. And let's talk about the structural arrangement of what's going on. And this feeds into contextual analysis and things like that. Okay, what did y'all find?
Well, he begins with repetition using if there.
Yes, good.
If there's any.
That's right.
If any.
Use of repetition, very important.
Units of thought.
That's right. He's got some units of thought here. Now, one thing you can't do from the English text, but you can do from a Greek text, is you can see in the sentence structures certain ideas are parallel to one another and certain ideas illustrate others. It's difficult from the English text to see that, but we'll touch on that a little bit. What's the relationship? Let's ask this question. We've got, mine's broken up into 2 paragraphs, 1 through 4, 5 through 11. What's the relationship between the 2 paragraphs? Did anyone pick up on that? Well, first of all, the first paragraph. What does the first paragraph contain? The basic approach to the first paragraph. How many commands do we got in this first paragraph? Really, you got 2 commands, one of which has multiple parts, in a sense. But there's 2 commands. Make my joy complete, right?
And do nothing.
Yeah, and then look out for others' interests. Make my joy complete, look out for others. Okay, so we've got the first paragraph is the command. Now, what's the second paragraph? And I'll pose this. He says, let each of you look out not only for his own interests, but also for the interests of others. Now, notice how the next paragraph begins. Let this mind be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus. So the next paragraph, it does begin with a command, but the rest of the paragraph does what? Describes Jesus' attitude. And so here's what I would propose. The first paragraph, which uses repetition predominantly, is the command. The second paragraph is the illustration. The whole point of the second paragraph is that Jesus embodied the kind of humility that I'm talking about that looks out for other people's interests rather than their own. So the second paragraph is an illustration of the truth of the first paragraph. And it's related to the first paragraph in that regard. You know what the next paragraph is? Therefore, my beloved, as you've always obeyed, not as in my presence only, work out your salvation with fear and trembling. That the application of the illustration that showed the command. It's the outworking of it in daily life. It's really the fulfilling. So you've got two paragraphs. One is a series of commands followed by an illustration of that. So that's the structure. And he uses things like repetition, these units of thought, to get you there. Okay? And he uses some figures of speech and some key terms to get you there. Now let's look at connectives. What were some of the key connectives to making these connections? How's that? Key connectives for the connections. Well, notice how the very first paragraph begins. It begins with a therefore. So he's drawing a conclusion from the previous paragraph. It's an application conclusion from the previous paragraph. Another key connective is repeated several times. If. Yeah. If. And there's an understood then. If there's anything, things, fulfill my joy by being like-minded, having the same love, one accord, one mind. Okay, and then, but those ifs are significant. If these things are true. And when you study it, you find that the kind of condition it is in the Greek is affirming that they are true. These are truths. Based on these truths, you ought to be acting this way. Okay? Another key connective. How about in verse 3? What's the key term there? But. Contrast. Right. And nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but, in contrast to that, lowliness of mind, esteem others better than himself. And again, the next verse, same thing. But. So see, the repeated use of but becomes significant in that paragraph. Okay. Now the next paragraph doesn't begin with a connective like you normally have. It begins with the imperative, let this mind be in you which was also in Christ Jesus. And then we go through. And again, what are some key terms here, key logical connectives that guide us in interpreting this paragraph?
Verse 7, but.
That's right. Again, strong contrast. Verse 7. But made himself of no reputation. Next key connective. What do you think?
Verse 9.
How about verse 8? And being found in appearance as a man. He's combining two important things. Yeah, and then verse 9. Therefore. That's right. Good. And then notice verse 12 begins with another therefore. There's not a lot of big connectives. There's other connecting words in here. But you see, think about the logic of what we have going on now. These contrasts, these connections, ands and buts, and the therefores. They're all very significant. That guide us to the point being made in the Philippian passage. And those are the kind of things you're looking for when you're looking for connectives. You're not looking for every and, because some ands aren't significant. And you're not even looking for every but, because not all of them are significant, or as significant, but you're looking for the one that things turn on, or the one that brings two key things together. You know, same thing with if, same thing as when. When can be a very important connective when it develops a chronological sequence. Or then, could be another very important term that guides you into the meaning of the text. And those are the kinds of things you look for. In the Colossian passage that you're studying, that's the kind of connective things that you would be looking for to be able to see the point that Paul's making as he's talking Christologically. What are those key words that bring together ideas? It shows relationships between this sentence and that sentence, or between this clause and the main clause, that guides me into really getting the point that he's making. And so that's how we would do that. Does that make sense? Make sense? Good exercise? You getting better at this? Yeah. Yeah. So in fact, next time I'll have you do to submit to me the textual relationship and a discussion of the key connectives for your Colossians passage. And when you talk about the textual connectives, tell me the word. Okay? Give me the word. Tell me the word. Its role. In other words, is it comparing, contrasting, continuing an idea? I gave you that list on connectives. What kind of a role does it have, and then what it's working on. The parts that it's connecting. I guess it would be one way to say it. In other words, if it's comparing, what two things is it comparing? Or what two things is it contrasting? Or what kind of a conclusion or application? And what is it applying to? So, which is the key connective? What are the things it's connecting, and what is the role that it's having in there? So I can see that you understand how it's being used. Because what this does for you then is that when you can see these things, you begin to see the real nuts and bolts of the argument, like of Paul or Peter or James. And you can see how these things are all interconnected and dependent. But also, then it alerts you when something's explaining something else. Or something is different from something else. And or that's when you can spot things like antithetic parallelism, even within the epistolary literature. And the real point begins to rise to the surface. And the subpoints become more and more evident. Because you see, here's the main statement. This is a subordinate clause. This is something subordinate to the main statement. This is explaining something in the main statement. So here's the big idea. And these things help me understand this big idea. And I'm not going to camp on the minor. I'm going to major on the major, and I'm going to recognize all the minor parts that feed into this major idea. And these connectives will help guide you to that. Okay, so that makes sense? Any questions on that? Okay, well, let's talk about doing a word study then. How do we do a word study? Because when you're doing all this stuff and you're studying a passage, you come across the word and you say, what does this mean? And what role is it playing? What is the significant word? This is obviously a significant word in this passage. Maybe I better make sure I know what it means, how it's being used. And so the first thing that the steps to take in doing the word study is, first of all, determine which words need to be studied. And you go, duh, of course that. No, you can get carried away and study too many words. Look at the passage and you say, okay, what 2 or 3 very significant words in this passage? If I really understand this word well, I'll understand the passage. Is this a word that I'm not real clear on? I think I know what it means, but I'm not real clear on. But if I was really clear, I'd understand it. That's the one worth doing the word study on. And they'll usually be the more rare words or the more technical words. Like a theologically technical word. So, after you've determined what words you want to study, the next thing you should do is determine its range of meanings. And that's where you go to the dictionary. And you look at all the possible meanings of the word. For example, if you want to know what the word trunk means, that's our favorite one. You go to a dictionary and it's got a whole list of meanings. That's its range of meanings. And so it can be a part of an elephant, it can be a part of a car, it can be the back of a car or front of a car, depending on if you're in the United States or in England. It can be a part of a telephone line. It can be a part of a railroad line. There's all kinds of possible meanings for this word, it's got a wide range, and that's true of some biblical words, that they have a range of possible meanings depending on how they're used. If you know the original languages, this becomes very helpful because you can go to tools like Ballard, Art, and Gingrich and look them up. Now, if you don't know the Greek language, you can still use these tools, but you need some things to aid you. And again, that's where the Strong's Concordance and the code numbers works. And now, again, in Lebronics and other tools, you can get it where it'll take you to that spot in the dictionary and you can figure it out. You still won't understand a lot of the stuff because there's technical jargon that if you know the languages, you understand what he's saying, but if you don't, it'll be difficult. But it'll still give you a lot of the information that you can sort through. And so you figure out what is the range of possible meanings. By the way, a good tool for doing this is Vine's Expository Dictionary of New Testament Words and Old Testament Words. If you don't know the original languages, that's a good tool to have. Vine's Expository Dictionary of the New Testament Words and then he's got one of Old Testament words, or you can get one that's both together. And I believe this is in the Lebronics if you get Lebronics, but if you don't have that, that would be a good tool to have. Because then you go to there and he'll give you the basic meanings of the word and where they're located, give you examples out of the text so you can turn there and see how it's used in the text. So an excellent tool. Now, the third step then is, and this one I think, personally, I consider it more and more optional. But this is something that traditionally was always emphasized, and that is to study the etymology of a word. Okay? I'll spell that for you. The etymology of the word is its history. It's its history. And you go to the historical roots. What did the word mean originally? And how did its meaning change over time? And now what does it mean? Now, the danger of etymological studies is that you can get sidetracked from the real meaning of the word. Now, the strength of an etymological study is that if you're giving a message and you say, well, in the original Greek, when it was first appeared in Greek society, and it meant this and this, and then 500 years later, it developed this nuance, and by New Testament times, it carried these three concepts behind it. It makes you sound very authoritative. People are very impressed. But the fact of the matter is, the etymology may have absolutely nothing to do with its meaning in New Testament times. My favorite one, ecclesia. Well, ecclesia. It's from ek and kaleo. Okay? And, or if you want to play Greek for our Greek students here, something like that. Ek, kaleo. And then they're put together. Well, ek means out of or out from. Kaleo means to call out. And originally, it referred to a practice in the Greek city-states where they were all pure democracies, and every decision had to be made by the whole community. And the town clerk would call out the people to the amphitheater, and they'd all gather there together, discuss it, and vote on it. And so when he called them out of their homes to the amphitheater, they were the called out ones. And so this came then to be, then ecclesia, the church is the ecclesia. We are the called out ones. We've been called out of the world to serve a living God, and we're separate from the world. Makes great preaching. The only problem is by the first century, nobody knew about the history of the Greek city-states. And they had no clue as to the derivation of the term and how it was used originally. What an ecclesia was in the first century was any group of people gathered on the side of the street. Or any gathering of people anywhere. Now what happened is Jesus coined the term to refer to the church. Because the term ecclesia is actually equivalent to the other Greek word which came out of the Hebrew, which was synagoge. The synagogue means a gathering of people. But rather than call the church a synagogue, he chose ecclesia, the synonym of synagogue, synagoge, the synonym ecclesia, and so he picked that term, and it became the term we use to describe ourselves. But that term was used commonly in the first century to designate any group of people who gathered for any reason. You know, like to go to a movie. So there's no deep significance in the Bible to this term, other than it refers to the church, gathered believers. But it doesn't carry that nuance of being called out of the world. Now, other places in Scripture does teach that we are called out from the world and we're elect and we're to be different from the world. So there are places that teach that, but not that word. But a false etymology can make it sound like that's what the word means because of its original meaning. Does that make sense? And that's the danger of etymological studies. Now, sometimes studying the etymology of a word is helpful because sometimes the author did know its etymology and uses it with that nuance. But that's very rare. Okay, so we need to be careful about that. Now, fourth step then, assuming you don't skip the third step, is using a concordance. You take a concordance and you do a comparative study of the words used throughout the Old and New Testament. And the way I would do it is this. If I'm studying a word that's, let's say, in Colossians, in this passage you're working at, the first thing you do is you get a concordance and you see where else does Paul use this word. Because that will give me a clue as to how Paul generally means to use it. Does it always have the same meaning? Or does he use it a couple of different ways? See, that will help me understand it. Then I would look at the New Testament in all of its uses in the Greek. And then the next step would be to look and see how it's used in the Old Testament as it was translated from the Hebrew into the Greek Septuagint. In other words, where did they translate Hebrew words into this same Greek word? And which Hebrew words did they translate into this same Greek word? Because that will, again, give me a clue as to how they understood this word to mean or be used at that time. But the problem is the Septuagint is 250 years before New Testament times. So you have to be careful about doing that because the Greek language had changed quite a bit in those 250 years. So again, you have to be careful. But use a concordance to go throughout, whether it's Old Testament or New Testament, depending on where your word occurs, to get a better feel for how it's used in that. That's where concordances are great. Then, fifth step is look at both synonyms and antonyms used within the context and used throughout the author's literature or the Bible, or the New Testament. Now, there's some good books out on synonyms and antonyms. Girdlestone does one, synonyms of the Old Testament. Trench does one, synonyms of the New Testament. And so there are some good tools out there that will help you with this, to find what the synonyms are. When you look in, I think Bauer and Gingrich, he lists some of the synonyms. And there's some other works that do the same thing. Then the sixth step is using a lexicon. And a lexicon is a fancy term for a dictionary. And other tools, study the meaning within the culture at the time it was written. Because these lexicons will give you that kind of information. You can get a dictionary of New Testament words as they were used in the New Testament time period. And so using that kind of a dictionary, you find out what its basic meaning was. Now there's all kinds of great tools out there for doing these kinds of studies. Probably some of the best ones to get would be like Zondervan's Pictorial Encyclopedia of the Bible. It's a 5-volume set. I got that when I was in seminary and have used it and continue to use it. It's a very handy tool. In fact, my wife was in seminary. She got a set too, so we got one set at home and one in my office. So we're covered. But you can get things like Harper's Bible Dictionary, Illustrated Bible Dictionary. There's a lot of good Bible dictionaries out there. Ivy Press just put out a set of dictionaries and encyclopedias. And again, if you have Lebronics, you can even get it on CD in Lebronics format. It's much easier to look stuff up. I went to the ETS meetings a few years ago, and they had just come out with the CD version of it, and I had only bought one of the dictionaries, and it's a set of like 6 of them. And for a quarter of the cost, I got the CD. So, you know, I ought to pay 4 times as much for the book. So it's great. And again, I've got it there, and I can research very quickly. But these dictionaries and these encyclopedias are excellent tools. And there are other tools like Brown, Driver, and Briggs, a Hebrew and English lexicon, and Englishman's Concordance and Englishman's Lexicon. You've got some that are geared for someone who doesn't know the original languages. That'll get you to all the basic stuff and explain things to you. You have others that are more technical for those who know the original languages that you can then use. And if you're really gung-ho, they even have a concordance of the Greek New Testament that's completely in Greek, except for the very front page, which is in German. So you know, so it's a great tool again for someone who knows the languages. Otherwise, it just looks good on the shelf. But there's all kinds of good lexicons out there. There's the Theological Dictionary of the Old Testament. There's a Theological Word Book of the Old Testament. There's the Theological Dictionary of the New Testament, TDNT as it's called, Kittle. You can get the little 1-volume red Kittle, or the little Kittle as it's called. There's all kinds of these tools, and you ought to get them and use them. Our library, there on Madison Avenue, the school library has a lot of these tools in it that you can play with and get a feel for. And again, Lebronics has many of these tools, and you can buy some of them and add them on. You know, they have add-ons of these things as well. But again, the less technical dictionary out there would be Vine's Expository Dictionary. For those who don't know the original languages, it's an excellent tool because he gives you the Greek words, but he explains them very well and all that. Now, 7th step then is, this is a step that, again, mostly scholars would take. The typical Bible study person wouldn't take it, and that is where you compare parallel words in cognate languages. And you can find tools that do this for you. But again, now we're getting into such technical stuff that, practically speaking, not even a pastor is going to be wasting time doing this. And it's a waste of time. Unless you're one of these high-powered scholars who's going into the derivations of the word and all this kind of stuff. This